And joining me now, Steve Hánki, Professor of Applied Economy at the Johns Hopkins University. Steve, thank you for joining me today and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Osama. Great to be with you again.
We met last year and you explained how bad the IMF deal is on the Egyptian economy. Today, here we go, new year, new IMF deal. So what's your assessment on the new IMF deal with Egypt?
Okay, now last year, just to remind everyone, today's April 27, 2024. We spoke at the end of January in 2023. So what's happened since then? Well, exactly what I predicted. You had a problem with the pound and it was going to get worse. And since then, it's depreciated by about 36% against the US dollar. I said that inflation would continue to be a big problem in Egypt. Today, the official inflation rate is 33% per year. I measure it every day. I just measured it this morning. And by my measure, it's 68%. It's twice as high as the official rate. So the official rate is really kind of rubbish. And everyone on the street in Cairo or Alexandria, wherever you are in Egypt, they know that the inflation is a lot higher than the official rate. It's right on my rate, 68%. Now, you mentioned the IMF, and at that time I indicated that the IMF wasn't the solution. Over the last 6 years, the IMF has given $20 billion worth of credits to Egypt. And what has it done? Nothing. I mean, Egypt has gone down, not up. It hasn't even stayed stable. The last thing I talked about were the President Sisi's vanity projects, the new capital and a variety of other vanity projects that he's been engaged in. And all I can say about those is that there's been a big study by a big expert at Oxford University, Bent Flyberg. He studied 16,000 mega projects in 136 countries, and they're always over budget, over time, under benefits, over and over again. And of course, that's what's going to happen in Egypt. They'll be over budget, over time, under benefits. And to give you some idea of the projects that are mega, that are completed on time, on budget, it's 0.5% only. So they're always the same. Complete disasters and a huge waste of money. Now people say, well, why would President Sisi want to do this? Well,
he simply answered this, Steve, a few days ago while a ceremony in the Olympic city, in the new administrative city. He said, this place was a dream 5 years ago, and here we go. We achieve it. We did it.
Well, now, and here's why this is important for Sisi, and particularly the structure of the economy in Egypt, where it's really controlled by the military. It's a quasi-military operation more than anything else. So that this is a signaling device, what they call in economics a signaling device. It's like a bank. Why does a bank reside in a very impressive, strong building? To signal that they're strong, they're safe. So the new administrative capital signals that Sisi and the military are strong and they're there. Everybody can see it.
Yeah, and back to the IMF again. Yesterday, the IMF published its first and second review after a month of delay. And it stated that Egypt did only 7 out of 15 structural reforms required by the IMF. So how do you explain that?
Well, I explain it by the fact that in fact the military runs the show, and the military doesn't want to do the structural reforms because they they view the structural reforms as a threat to the military privilege and the military enterprise that runs a country. By the way, there's no country in the Middle East, if you look at the military involvement, and you look at the 19 countries in the Middle East, which I've done, the military involvement in Egypt is much more severe than any other country. For example, it's even twice as involved as Iraqi. It's even twice or a little more involved than Syria. Even the Syrian military is not as involved as much. So you end up with the countries where you have very little military involvement in the economy is the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and then a little more involvement in Morocco, Qatar, and Iran. Iran even has much less involvement of the military in the economy than Egypt. So we're talking about a big-time military enterprise. And that means everything. They not only, we know they own and operate a number of businesses directly and indirectly in Egypt, but also they control, they're kind of the puppet master that controls the bureaucracy and the regulations. And the regulations are a big problem in Egypt. If you look at the 165 countries that are rated in the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World report this year, where does Egypt stand? It's 144 out of 165. It's at the bottom of the barrel. And you have legal problems, red tape problems, property right problems, trade problems. And of course, we can talk a little bit later maybe about the whole monetary problems with the central bank and the currency and the inflation. So that's the IMF report in a nutshell is admitted that the IMF has failed. But the IMF usually fails. Most of the countries that receive IMF money are recidivists. They come back over and over and over and over again for more IMF credit because nothing works. And I've done a number of studies on the IMF, and actually it's quite interesting. If you have IMF intervention, it makes things worse, not better. Most people think, oh, if we get an IMF loan, that's going to save the day. We're going to get better. The economy is going to improve. The average person is going to improve. No, that's not the case. It actually is worse. You're better off with no IMF involvement.
Okay, but the government explained this many times, Steve, and said, here is the point. Every time the IMF approve a new deal with Egypt, this will gather a lot of foreign investments into the country, and this will save the economy, and this will increase the growth rate.
Well, it really doesn't have anything to do with the IMF. It goes the other way around. If you look at this new UAE deal, total that package is about $35 billion. That 24 billion of that 35 is foreign direct investment. Then the rest is basically a cash handout going through the central bank. Yep. But the point here is that happened first, and then the IMF, after that $35 billion deal, then the IMF said, oh, we're going to pony up some more money and approve things. So it wasn't the IMF that came first. It was the UAE that came first. And that was a geopolitical deal, by the way. The motivation behind that is very clear. And I know this, by the way, because
this is a quite interesting point regarding the UAE. You were a member of the Financial Advisory Council of the United Arab Emirates. So from your position, how the UAE decision makers think about such a huge investment into a foreign country like what's happened in Ras Al Hikma deal, 35 billion once to Egypt. Is it all about investment, about economy, or as you mentioned, it's about geopolitics?
It's about geopolitics. The UAE is very intent on neutralizing the Brotherhood and eliminating or restricting political Islam in the Middle East, and the UAE views Egypt as a kingpin, a key place where you definitely want to keep the Brotherhood out, and they want stability, and if they have to put Band-Aids worth $35 billion on Egypt to keep it stable, that's fine. Now, by the way, this did stabilize things, because in the short term anyway, that money will be able to use to fill the financial gaps and the financial external requirements in Egypt. And the big one, by the way, is paying off the IMF. So it goes around. The UAE is basically bailing out Egypt so that they can be bailed out and pay their IMF debts. So it's quite a geopolitical move more than anything else. And by the way, the UAE has already been heavily invested. This ADQ fund at the UAE has been heavily invested. It all really started in the Arab Spring. That's when the UAE became very concerned that the Brotherhood was going to get a big foothold in Egypt, and they didn't want that. So if you look at the top 3 performing stocks on the Cairo Exchange, the top 2, Commercial and International Bank, Eastern Tobacco, those are heavily the UAE ADQ fund is heavily invested in those, as you know. And they're also working heavily with the third biggest stock on the exchange, and that's the Talat Mustafa Group, which is quite involved in this project. That Mustafa Group, by the way, is the stock price has soared. If you look at who benefits from this, well, I can tell you one directly is the Mustafa Group.
Yeah, but the UAE said that they expect $150 billion as a revenues from this project. So they are talking about economy, Steve, not geopolitics.
Well, the 150 billion. Let's put it this way: that's kind of what they call a pie in the sky number. You can say anything you want to. I mean, where's the 150 billion? I mean, that's something that some analyst has put on a piece of paper, and we don't know really anything about it. There's no detail. It's a big number. And by the way, the 35 billion is a huge number. And as I say, in the short term, it really does bail out Egypt, because not only the 35 billion, but also they then got more money from the IMF and another dollop of cash from the IMF as a result of the UAE money. So it's so far in the short run, it looks pretty good.
Okay, and Sisi, there is a theory, and we discussed it last year in our interview, that Egypt is too big to fail. And to be honest, Sisi is clever. He plays this card very well. And the United Arab Emirates, I think they believe that Egypt is too big to fail, or Sisi is too big to fail. So they backed him with this big deal in Ras Al Hikmah. What do you think?
I think this is absolutely right. But it's all related to the Brotherhood. You got to get that in your head. That's why it's too big to fail. They do not want the Brotherhood to have a big foothold in Egypt, and that is a high priority in the UAE. I know this because, as you said, I know the UAE, so I was an advisor for many years.
But this may be right if we still in 2014, a year after the military coup. But we are now a decade. We are now 10 years on after throwing the brotherhood from the power in Egypt. So,
yeah, well, and they want to make certain that it stays that way. And by the way, if this financial crisis hadn't been solved, and if the Egyptians would not have been able to pay back their debts to the IMF, there would be another crisis and a further crisis with the pound and the currency and an inflation crisis. And that's just the kind of environment that Brotherhood likes and thrives in. That's what the UAE is doing here.
Okay.
They're injecting a huge stabilization package.
Okay, and the Egyptian government, Steve, they said all over the last few weeks after the Ras Al Hikma deal, this is the light at the end of the tunnel. And we almost reached this light. They are optimistic about the future. They giving promises everywhere to the people that there is no price soaring, there is no inflation anymore. And we will go ahead with a big deal with Saudi Arabia and Ras Jamila. So from your perspective, how do you expect the Ras Al Hikma deal between Egypt and the UAE to impact Egypt's economy in the short and long term?
Okay, the short term is pretty clear. It is a band-aid that allows for immediate external financing requirements to be met. So that crisis is gone. It also has allowed for more injection of money by the IMF into Egypt in the short run, and that is, arguably a positive. And if you look at the stock market, it's going up. If you look at the currency, it's more or less been, stabilized a little bit where it is right now. And the foreign reserves have been increased at the central bank. So everything in the short run is positive. Now, this all revolves who benefits. Well, obviously, people that own the Talad Mustafa Group stock benefit, and those elites who are directly involved in this project will benefit. And what about the average Egyptian? Well, the average Egyptian is not going to make much difference. The growth rate is pretty. You look at all the forecasts; it's not for very fast growth in Egypt in the coming years. It's more, shall we say, stable. It isn't going down, but it isn't doing much. It isn't really up to any kind of reasonable estimate of what a potential would be. And that gets into this rating and the structural thing. If you don't fix the structure, nothing really is going to happen for the average Egyptian.
Yeah, you mentioned the central bank.
You have to get these foreign direct investments or foreign aid. It's money coming from usually relatively wealthy countries, and it comes out basically the middle class in those countries that foot the bill. And where does the money go? It goes into the elites in the recipient country. So the elites will do well. Most of the money will go into the pockets of by the way, the military.
Okay, you mentioned before the Egypt Central Bank, Steve.
Will go into the military enterprises.
Okay, Egypt Central Bank is considering an inflation targeting strategy. So do you think this is the right approach given Egypt's history of high inflation and given the fact that there is a huge gap between the official inflation and Steve Hankey's inflation index?
No, this is the inflation targeting, again, is wishful thinking. It never works in these, shall we say, developing countries like Egypt. For example, right now, what is the inflation rate? The inflation target, excuse me, Osama. The inflation target in Egypt is between 5 and 9%. And what do we have? The official inflation is 33%. Hankey's inflation measure, which is accurate, is 68%. So look at how far they're off. if they were to hit the inflation target of 5 to 9%, Hankey's golden growth rate in the money supply would be between about 7 and 11% per year, about 7 to 11% per year. What is the growth rate in the money supply today? The growth rate is 17%. It's way above where it should be. And that shows you the IMF can't control a central bank. The IMF doesn't even claim that it can control a central bank. But the central bank just keeps printing pounds, keeps pumping out money, and that's why you've got this inflation problem. The IMF has been around in Egypt. Forget the structural problems. Just look at the inflation problem and this so-called inflation targeting and floating the exchange rate, what they did in March. None of it's worked, and none of it will work. It is not sustainable in the long run. A central bank with an inflation target in Egypt is not sustainable. The pound will not be sustainable, and inflation will continue to be a problem. And I think the only solution is a currency board system. Now, a currency board system, the pound would be issued. It would be anchored to an anchor currency, let's say the euro or the US dollar, for example, and the pound would be backed 100% with that anchor currency reserve money. And it would trade at a fixed exchange rate, freely convertible with no restrictions or anything like that. And that means the pound would be a clone of whatever the anchor was. Let's just say it was the US dollar. If you had a currency board with a US dollar anchor, the pound would be a clone. It would be exactly the same as the US dollar. If you didn't like your pound, you could take it in and exchange it at the fixed exchange rate for the US dollar, and you would know that you would receive US dollars because the currency board would be required to have 100% backing for the pounds that they issued. So that would be the way to fix the problem immediately, by the way, and that would force a hard budget constraint to be put on Egypt, and it would start controlling the budget, which is not controlled, by the way, which is out of control. That's one reason you've got a huge pile of debt.
Yeah.
And you will have long-term problems. These debts will have to be paid, by the way. So I don't know, maybe Sisi will be very clever and figure out how to talk the UAE into financing the debt.
To be honest, Steve, in the last 4 months, from the beginning of 2024, the man was able to gather as much as he can from foreign currency. UAE funding him with 35 billion, and the IMF 8 billion, the EU with another 8 billion, the International Bank with a 10 billion. So the man gathered almost between 50 and 60 billion dollars in months, in a blink of eye.
Absolutely, you're right. It's like having a patient in the critical care unit in a hospital. He put the patient first, Sisi, due to economic mismanagement. He put Egypt into the hospital and into the critical care unit, and then all of a sudden he could see the patient was going to die, and he was able to rush in with alliances that he's had, tapping especially the UAE, and save the patient. The patient is out of the critical care unit now. I would say the patient's kind of permanently in the hospital. They haven't been released from the hospital, but they certainly are out of the critical care unit.
And in your opinion, this patient, for how long he can survive with this 50 billions?
Well, again, I don't know what the cash flow burn looks like. I really haven't figured it out, but it gives a patient some life for a while. But if you don't change the structure of the thing, and you don't get the military out of the economy, The key thing you got to remember, the elephant in the room is the military, period. The military runs the economy. And if you don't get them out of the economy, you're going to burn through the 50 billion and you're going to come up again with a begging bowl over in the UAE or Saudis or whoever you're passing the bowl to and say, look, we got to fill it up again. We're out of money.
And from your opinion, Steve, what are the biggest risks and challenges facing the Egyptian economy that could undermine the potential benefits on the short term from Ras Al Hikma deal with the UAE?
Okay, the short-term thing is all this war with Israel and Gaza and the collateral damage that it's producing a huge amount of collateral damage. This what's going on in Gaza. And you know more about that than I do, but the collateral damage is massive. And if you look at tourism, for example, someplace in Lebanon, the Minister of Economy in Lebanon was on the BBC Hard Talk program last night, and the tourist, he indicated that due to the conflict in Gaza and the problems related to Israel and Hezbollah and Syria and Yemen and you name it, Iraq, the tourism is tanking. I mean, a tremendous tourist destination, first class, is Lebanon, of course. They depend on tourism. And that's this project that we're talking about in Egypt, it's basically a tourist operation. They claim there are going to be other light industries associated with it, things like that. But basically, it's tourism.
Yeah.
And with this war going on and the destabilization in the region going on, tourism, would you want to go to the Middle East now? Is that safe? That's what people start asking. And a lot of people say, no, it's not safe. I'm not going to take a chance and go there.
Yeah, and my final question, Steve, and you tweeted this morning, and I quote, can President Sisi swim? And this is my final question for you. Can Sisi swim?
So far, he's been able to keep his head above water. He as I say, he came pretty close on the economy. I'm talking about the economy now. Pretty close to going underwater, but he was able to find these floats and get his head above the surface. Right now, his head is above the surface.
Yeah. Professor of Applied Economy at the Johns Hopkins University, Steve Hánki, thank you very much.
Thank you, Osama. Great to be with you.